What does it take for a country to stand up against the world's strongest empire? What sparked the American Revolution and changed history forever? Today, we're diving into the causes and events of the American Revolution, the fight that created the United States of America. The American Revolution from 1775 to 1783 wasn't just about battles. It was a crucial moment in the fight for freedom, where 13 British colonies in North America decided to challenge British control. But what made them take such a big step? Let's break it down and find out. The road to rebellion. Before the revolution began, life in the American colonies wasn't all that different from the rest of the British Empire. The colonies had been governed with relative independence for decades. British laws were often ignored or applied loosely, and the colonies thrived economically. However, that all began to change in the mid-1700s. The British Empire had just fought a massive war, the French and Indian War 1754 to 1763, which drained its resources. To recover financially, Britain began tightening control over its colonies and enforcing taxes that were seen as unfair. But here's the catch. The colonists had no representation in the British Parliament. They didn't have a voice in the decisions that affected their daily lives. And that, my friends, was the breaking point. The tax that changed everything. One of the earliest and most significant acts of British oppression was the Stamp Act of 1765. This law required that many printed materials in the colonies, including newspapers and legal documents, be printed on paper with an official stamp that came with a tax. The colonists weren't having it. No taxation without representation became their rallying cry. To them, it wasn't just about the money, it was about their rights as Englishmen, rights that were being ignored by the Crown. In response, the colonies organized protests, boycotts of British goods, and even the formation of the Sons of Liberty, a group of radical colonists who made their feelings known with force. The Stamp Act was eventually repealed, but the damage was done. The seeds of rebellion had been planted. The intolerable acts. But the British didn't stop there. In retaliation for events like the Boston Tea Party, a protest against a different British tax on tea, Britain passed a series of laws known as the Intolerable Acts, or Coercive Acts, in 1774. These laws were designed to punish Massachusetts, and more specifically Boston, which had become a center of rebellion.
Kings across Europe consolidated their power under this hot new philosophy called absolutism. In England, King James, and especially his son King Charles.
One of the most significant measures was the Boston Port Act, which closed the port of Boston until the tea destroyed during the Boston Tea Party was paid for. Other laws gave the British military the authority to take over the colony, and colonial self-governance was severely limited. The colonists saw these actions as direct violations of their rights, and they responded by organizing the First Continental Congress in 1774, a unified front against British oppression. Battles of Lexington and Concord. By April 1775, tensions were at a boiling point. British General Thomas Gage was ordered to suppress the growing rebellion in Massachusetts. On the night of April 18, 1775, Paul Revere's midnight ride warned the colonists that British troops were marching toward Lexington and Concord to seize their weapons. The next day, April 19th, the first shots of the revolution were fired at the battles of Lexington and Concord. The British troops were met with fierce resistance from colonial militias, and by the end of the day, more than 200 British soldiers had been killed or wounded. The American Revolution had officially begun, the first victories. The next few months saw more fighting, but also some surprising victories for the colonies. The Battle of Bunker Hill, fought in June 1775, was a pivotal moment. While the British won the battle, they suffered heavy losses, more than 1,000 casualties, which was a staggering number for the time. This gave the American colonists a massive moral boost. In July 1775, the Continental Congress appointed George Washington as the commander of the Continental Army. Washington, a Virginian aristocrat and former military officer, was respected by both the southern and northern colonies. He quickly set to work organizing the troops, which were often poorly trained and under-equipped. A war of attrition. The war wasn't easy for the Americans. Throughout 1776 and 1777, the Continental Army faced multiple setbacks. The British, with their experienced army and naval supremacy, seemed unstoppable. But Washington, with his strategic brilliance, managed to turn the tide during the winter of 1776 to 1777.
Dutch rationalism and Quaker tolerance, they were also fiercely socially liberal, with long traditions of freedoms of speech, religion, and the press. New York.
On Christmas night in 1776, Washington executed a daring raid across the icy Delaware River, surprising a group of Hessian mercenaries at the Battle of Trenton. The victory at Trenton gave the Americans much-needed morale, and Washington followed it up with another victory at Princeton. But it wasn't just Washington's leadership that helped turn the tide. The French, who were eager to see their British rivals suffer, began secretly supporting the American cause. France sent military aid, financial resources, and eventually, troops and naval forces. In 1778, France formally entered the war on the side of the colonies, providing a crucial boost. Saratoga, the turning point. The American victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October 1777 was a game-changer. British General Burgoyne's forces were trapped and forced to surrender, a victory that convinced France to openly enter the war. It was also a clear sign that the Americans could actually win the war, boosting morale even further. The war expands. Even though Saratoga was a turning point, the war wasn't over. The British shifted their focus to the southern colonies, hoping many Southerners, especially plantation owners, would support them. But their plan didn't work out as expected. In the South, Nathanael Greene, the Continental Army leader, used smart tactics. He would retreat and then surprise the British with attacks, weakening their forces and frustrating them. One famous leader in the South was Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox. Marion's small group used guerrilla tactics, quickly striking the British and hiding in the swamps, making it hard for the British to catch them. Meanwhile, George Rogers Clark led successful attacks against British forts in the Ohio Valley, stopping them from controlling the western lands. Despite these victories, the war wasn't over. Every small win brought the Americans closer to independence, but many more battles lay ahead. The road to freedom was still long, but Saratoga was a big step forward. The final push. The American Revolution came to its peak in 1781 at the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia. British General Cornwallis had been strengthening his position in Virginia, but with French naval support, George Washington saw an opening to strike. Together, they surrounded Cornwallis at Yorktown and blocked his escape by sea. After weeks of constant pressure and bombardment, Cornwallis had no choice but to surrender in October 1781. This surrender essentially ended the war, although British forces stayed in America for a while. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, officially recognizing the United States as an independent country. The aftermath: a new nation. The war's end marked the beginning of a new era for America. The Treaty of Paris not only secured independence, but also expanded American territory, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. The young United States was now free to chart its own course. But the revolution hadn't just been about gaining independence, it was about setting a foundation for a new society built on the principles of liberty, equality, and democracy. However, the road to a stable government was far from smooth. The Articles of Confederation were weak, and it took years before the US Constitution was written and ratified in 1787. But the revolution had sparked a fire that would shape the nation for centuries to come. The legacy. The American Revolution wasn't just a war for independence, it was a revolution of ideas. The principles of self-government, individual rights, and democracy that emerged from the revolution became the foundation of the United States. The revolution showed the world that it was possible for a group of colonies with limited resources and against overwhelming odds to stand up to an empire and win their freedom. In the end, it was a combination of brave leaders, tenacious soldiers, and the support of foreign allies that brought victory. But it was the desire for freedom and self-determination that drove the American Revolution forward. And today, those ideals continue to influence nations and movements across the globe. So, what can we learn from the American Revolution? It shows that when people come together for a common cause, no matter the odds, great things can happen. The American Revolution was a breaking point for the colonies, and from that moment, the world would never be the same. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What part of the American Revolution do you think had the biggest impact on the world? And if you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next deep dive into history.